The United Nations issues a stern warning to Gambian President Yahya Jammeh for attempting to hang on to power. South Sudan President Salva Kiir asks his citizens to forgive him for his past mistakes. And health experts are raising concerns over the interaction between diabetes and tuberculosis. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. The top UN official in West Africa says Gambian President Yahya Jammeh will not be allowed to remain in office after his elected term ends next month. Mohamed Ibn Chambers, UN Special Representative for West Africa and the Sahel, said Wednesday that Jammeh will face strong sanctions if he clings to power. Chambers accompanied a delegation of presidents representing the regional bloc ECOWAS who traveled to Gambia on Tuesday but failed to reach a deal that would see Jammeh step down. Meanwhile, United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon condemned the takeover of Gambia's Elections Commission headquarters by soldiers and called for them to vacate the building immediately. In a statement read by spokesman Stefan Dujarric, Ban said the action violates the independent status of the Commission under the Gambian Constitution and could compromise the sensitive electoral material under the IEC's custody.
He condemns this outrageous act of disrespect of the will of the Gambian people and defiance towards the international community at a time when high-level ECOWAS delegation was in the country to broker a peaceful transfer of power. The action violates the independent status of the Commission and could compromise the sensitive electoral material under the Commission's custody. The Secretary General reiterates his call for a peaceful, timely and orderly transfer of power in full respect of the will of the Gambian people as expressed in the presidential election.
Well, ECOWAS leaders will discuss Gambia at a summit in Nigeria on Saturday. Violence continues to flare in the Central African Republic despite an election that brought in a new government to the country in February. At times, the fighting is between Muslim and Christian militia, but in late November, two different groups tied to the Muslim Salaka militia clashed in the northeastern town of Briar, leaving an estimated 85 people, civilians rather, dead, 80 wounded and 13,000 people displaced. VOA's Zach Badoff has more.
Salamatu Abu Bakr lives in this makeshift refugee camp. She arrived here in late November after fighting broke out in her neighborhood. Fighters came to her house and robbed her.
I'm scared because I have nobody to help me and I'm a bit blind. So I'm scared about the future.
A mother of 8 children, she's afraid to return to her neighborhood. But here, she said, there's not enough food or blankets.
You can see my kids sleeping on the floor without blankets. I have nothing to cook. I have nothing. I'm worried about getting by.
About 5,000 people live in this camp. Jean-Louis Banda Dumba says he was the first to arrive. A former fighter, he turned in his gun as part of demobilization efforts. He fled to the camp in November seeking protection after militants threatened to kidnap him for putting down his weapon.
I'm just telling them that I'm just here to avoid problems, not to betray anybody. I don't want to take any risk to my life by leaving here. I gave up my weapon for peace.
Dumba said people are here because their neighborhoods are still insecure. But he said they need more help from humanitarian organizations. 8 organizations are trying to fill the gaps.
So still a lot of needs here on the site and in the neighborhoods. So people have access now to water and sanitation and hygiene, but still needs apparently in terms of shelter, in terms of access to food.
In terms of medical, there was need in terms of for patients who are having malnutrition, but also there was need of pregnant women preventing disease in those camps. Plenty of cases of diarrhea, respiratory disease, plenty of cases of malaria. This is also the direct result of the fighting.
He said it's tough for his team to do its work.
Security situation was really very complicated. It means it was difficult to move around. All the shops were closed, and there was plenty of soldiers around the town, everywhere.
Civilians told VOA that the roughly 250 UN troops in Bria did nothing to stop the fighting, although the UN mission reports its troops patrol the city and have taken steps to protect refugee camps. Zach Badorf for VOA News, Central African Republic.
The humanitarian situation in war-torn Syria remains dire, but operations are finally underway in the battled city of Aleppo on Thursday to evacuate thousands of people from the last remaining rebel-held areas of Aleppo. A convoy of buses and ambulances with nearly 1,000 people on board made their way out of the Ramusa district of Aleppo. Those in need of medical aid were due to be the first taken from eastern Aleppo, which the opposition seized in 2012. Other civilians and rebel fighters would follow later. Renewed violence was part of the reason the evacuation was postponed from its original start on Wednesday, as both sides of the conflict blamed each other for breaching a ceasefire brokered by Russia and Turkey. The final departure of rebels from Aleppo would mark a major victory for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. His forces have been pressing a Russia-backed military campaign that accelerated in recent weeks as they captured more and more territory from the opposition. While South Sudan's President Salva Kiir is asking the nation's people to forgive him for his past mistakes, the president made the apology Wednesday during an end-of-year speech before the National Legislative Assembly. He used the speech to order government forces to observe a ceasefire and create a conducive environment for communities to reconcile. The president also called for a national dialogue, one that he says will include people from all sectors of society as the three-year conflict drags on in parts of the country.
I also call upon those propagating hate speeches in the social media, international and local forums, to stop tearing their country and communities apart. We are bound together as one people, one nation, and we cannot allow our political and social disappointments to destroy our country, our unity.
Kiir also warned against hate speech, saying his government will take serious measures against individuals who promote ethnic hatred and violence. The war was triggered by fighting between supporters of President Kiir and his rival former First Vice President Riek Machar in December 2013. A peace deal reached last year in Addis Ababa broke down in renewed fighting this past July. Earlier this month, a United Nations Human Rights Monitor warned that ethnic cleansing is underway in parts of South Sudan and warned the country is on the brink of a genocide. Now over to Europe. European Union leaders meeting in Brussels Thursday are calling for more vessels for the Libyan Coast Guard to help it prevent migrants leaving its shores for Europe. Migrants arriving from Libya to EU member state Italy are higher this year than last year at more than 175,000 people. The EU's naval operation in the Mediterranean include targeting arms traffickers and training the Libyan Coast Guard. They are also obliged to rescue people out of the sea. Most of the people rescued leave Libya in rickety boats provided by people smugglers. One EU official says the bloc is increasingly worried that its naval operations has become a taxi service. Officials are seeking to make it more effective in preventing migrants from leaving Libya rather than just having EU's search and rescue operations. President-elect Donald Trump met Wednesday with top executives from the biggest U.S. technology companies, many of whom were among his fiercest critics during this year's election campaign. But there appear to be no signs of lingering animosity during their discussions. The meeting at Trump's New York City headquarters included Facebook Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla Motors. The president-elect invited the CEOs to telephone him directly if they want to talk and suggested they meet again as often as every 3 months. Many of the high-tech leaders had strong misgivings about a Trump presidency before the election because of his strong criticism of China, his threats to tear up trade deals, and his plans to curb immigration, which would limit the number of highly qualified workers available to technology companies. An open letter signed Tuesday by more than 200 high-tech firms employees pledged not to help Trump develop a data registry to track people based on their religion or for possible deportation. Well, it's been more than 2 years since a Midwestern U.S. city of Ferguson, Missouri, was rocked by days of violence after a white police officer shot and killed African-American Michael Brown. The 18-year-old's death sparked riots and protests and fueled a nationwide movement against police mistreatment of African-Americans. While the officer was cleared of any wrongdoing, the incident led to a federal investigation that uncovered racial bias within the city's police departments. VOA's Chris Simpkins updates the story.
This neighborhood was the epicenter of riots and protests after Michael Brown was killed by a Ferguson police officer in 2014. Mayor James Knoll says the community is still healing.
I would hope that people will start to have confidence both in their police department and in their city government again.
In Ferguson, our investigation will assess the police department's use of force, including deadly force.
That confidence was shattered after the Justice Department found the mostly white Ferguson Police Department systematically engaged in racial profiling and excessive use of force against blacks.
So what do we have going on?
Ferguson Police Chief Delrish Moss was hired in 2016. He's leading the department through reforms agreed to with the federal government.
What my hope is going forward, and that is actually to have people perceive the police in Ferguson differently. And that has a lot to do with community engagement.
As part of an agreement, Ferguson is required to offer diversity training for officers and establish a civilian review board to address excessive force and police disciplinary practices. The requirements have cost the city millions of dollars.
There's a lot of good things that we can do, and there's a lot of good things we will do as part of the consent decree. Are they putting a burden on the city that's difficult? Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely a burden that that we're learning to deal with.
Many people we spoke with said progress has been made in the reforms that came out of the protests that took place here 2 years ago.
I think people see that that the city, the police department is pushing forward.
Councilman Bell.
Aye. After the unrest, lawyer Wesley Bell decided to run and was elected to the Ferguson City Council in 2015. Since then, he's pressed for a community policing program.
When people are happy with their police department, other things aren't as troubling. If we're in compliance and the Department of Justice is on board and the judge says, hey, you're in compliance, what that means, practically speaking, is that we're operating a police department that will be the gold standard of police departments in this country.
Bell says all of Ferguson's residents can take pride in the changes to come.
To me, out of tragedy comes opportunity. And I think we have to make sure that this tragedy didn't happen in vain if we take the opportunity to push these reforms, to make progress, and set the example for what change and reform can look like.
Oh, yeah. Oh. Other city leaders believe if residents remain engaged in the process, this community will be stronger than ever before. Chris Simpkins, VOA News, Ferguson, Missouri.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. Check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Coming up, health experts raise concerns over the interaction between diabetes and tuberculosis. Stay with us.
News and notes. This is Living Better.
It's a major problem worldwide. Hip fractures in the elderly, usually caused by a fall. Old people are at high risk for the injury as their bones may weaken and their sense of balance declines. Now, a potential way to avoid fractures with a reusable personal airbag called the Volk, worn around the waist.
When a fall is detected, the system activates and the gas capsule releases the gas into the airbag.
Dutch entrepreneur Filippo van Hellenberg-Hubar came up with the idea for the Volk and approached Professor Heike Valeri at the Delft University of Technology to help develop it.
Combined with our models of how humans move, we can detect whether there's a fall about to occur or not.
The device won't be on market until 2017, but reviewers say it could help elders stay active for longer, preventing serious injury and its associated cost. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
How do you see the world?
I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
Well, it's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu with details on the lack of medicine, medical care and education for many of the world's children. Lino.
The United Nations Children's Agency says nearly a quarter of the world's children live in conflict or disaster-stricken countries. UNICEF says an estimated 535 million children live often without access to medical care, quality education, proper nutrition and protection. Sub-Saharan Africa is home to nearly three-quarters of the global children living in countries affected by emergencies, followed by the Middle East and North Africa, where 12% of these children reside. UNICEF says the emergencies faced today by the most vulnerable children threaten to undermine immense progress made in recent decades. Since 1990, the number of children dying before their 5th birthday has been reduced, and hundreds of millions of children have been lifted out of poverty. The impact of conflict, natural disasters, and climate change is putting children at risk of disease, violence, and exploitation. As 2016 nears to an end, let's take a look at some of the stories that were significant this year. Here is VOA's Carol Pearson.
Zika is such a mild illness that most people don't know they have it. But in the past 2 years, a surge of babies born with extremely small heads showed the world that Zika is anything but harmless. The virus originated in Uganda more than 60 years ago. It recently emerged in Brazil, then surged north to Florida, and possibly to Texas. Dr. Anthony Costello with the World Health Organization said even one affected child has a very big impact on the community and a family's ability to cope.
It's a public health problem of huge concern for the world. 69 countries have seen Zika virus emerge in the last 2 years. We're talking about a virus that causes brain damage and potentially lifelong disability, which is a huge blow to families.
Right now, doctors can only advise women not to travel to areas where the virus is spreading, to avoid mosquito bites, or to delay pregnancy. There's no vaccine against Zika, but one could be available in 2018. In Nigeria, the polio virus reemerged in the violence-racked northern part of the country, where it's hard to make sure every child gets vaccinated. 3 children were diagnosed with the disease just when Nigeria was thought to be close to becoming polio-free. The virus also exists in another conflict zone, along the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Those behind the effort say they are determined to eliminate the disease. Polio cases have decreased by over 99% since 1988, from about 350,000 cases then to less than 3 dozen in 2016. At the beginning of December, the National Institutes of Health announced the start of a major trial of an experimental vaccine against the AIDS virus.
An HIV vaccine is not going to be easy. We may not even know if we're going to get a vaccine.
Fauci described the advances in AIDS treatment as nothing short of spectacular.
Today, the combinations of therapies we have for individuals, if someone's in their 20s and gets infected and comes in and gets on a combination of drugs, you could predict that they would live an additional 50 years, 50. That is one of the most extraordinary advances in the transition from basic research to an applicable intervention in any field of medicine.
If an effective vaccine can be found, it could finally mean the end for a virus that has infected more than 70 million people and killed 35 million people over the past half-century. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
Turning now to tuberculosis, medical experts say substantial progress is being made in reducing the incidence of TB over the past 2 decades. However, the disease remains a major cause of morbidity and mortality globally. Studies published in the medical journal The Lancet say diabetes prevalence is threatening to hinder progress in global tuberculosis control. In our Ask the Expert segment today, we spoke with Dr. Ariel Pablo Mendez, the Assistant Administrator for Global Health at USAID, and asked him, how does diabetes affect tuberculosis?
Just as HIV allowed for TB to spring back in the United States 20 years ago, now we are seeing a growing global pandemic of obesity and diabetes. And diabetes also permits tuberculosis to be activated in people with the disease. Diabetes predisposed to many infections. It weakens your immune system. The actual mechanism is the subject of a lot of analysis, but pretty much people with diabetes have double risk to developing tuberculosis than people without diabetes. And because we are seeing a lot more diabetes everywhere, we can expect that to play a role. Although the majority of cases will still be in people who didn't have anything. And just like HIV was only one factor, about 10-11% are related to HIV, the majority are related to just poverty, malnutrition, and the fact that people were born in places where tuberculosis happens to be around us.
And that was Dr. Ariel Pablo Mendez speaking with us about the interaction between tuberculosis and diabetes. If you have a medical question that you would like to have answered, tweet me at Linor Moudou, and we'll have a medical expert respond to your query. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, Lino, thank you very much. And now be sure to watch Lino Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, the U.S. invests millions of dollars under its Power Africa initiative to light up the most remote villages in Africa. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In Belgium, the European Union hails Niger for cutting the number of migrants flowing into Europe at an EU summit in Brussels. In Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari presents a record $24 billion budget for 2017. We stay in Nigeria, where 8 teams from the African continent participate in Beach Soccer African Cup of Nations 2016 in Lagos. Finally, in France, Jacqueline Gompi, a French entrepreneur of Cameroonian descent, publishes a guidebook for everything and anything African, to be found in Paris. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Well, in many parts of Africa, people are suffering from unreliable access to power, with many rural communities cut off from national grids. In the past 5 years, industry experts say innovation in off-grid solar power has reached a tipping point, making it accessible to even the most remote villages. As Henry Ridgewell reports, the U.S. government is investing millions of dollars in the technology under its Power Africa initiative.
With an estimated 600 million people across Africa having no access to power, new solar technology could provide the solution. So-called off-grid solar systems have plummeted in price. Now consumers can spread the cost by effectively renting the equipment and paying for the electricity as they need it for less than 50 US cents a day. Lumos Global is among the firms rolling out the technology in Nigeria alongside mobile phone operator MTN. The company's head says installation is simple.
He puts the system on the roof, he puts the indoor unit in the home, there's a cable to connect in between them. It's a plug on both sides, you don't need to be an electrician or anything like this. And then you need to charge this by credit. So the sun charges the electricity, but you need to provide the credit to power the system up. And you do this using your mobile phone.
The company received financing from the US government's Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or OPIC, as part of President Barack Obama's Power Africa initiative.
So $50 million of OPIC money as debt towards systems. That will take us to 250,000 systems in Nigeria.
As the off-grid sector booms, several African countries have also invested millions of dollars in large on-grid solar plants. Senegal opened one of Africa's largest in October, able to generate 20 megawatts, enough for 160,000 people.
Every country needs to diversify its energy sources. In Senegal, solar power has its place. The amount of sunshine here is about 40 degrees right now. It's double compared to what a solar farm of the same capacity in England or in northern France would produce.
The International Energy Agency forecasts that almost 1 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa will gain access to on-grid power by 2040. But 500 million people will still be off-grid. Investors believe solar power could fill that gap, while also helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Well, and that's our show for today. Now, be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, Break Africa, that's between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us in Washington. Have a good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's Newswords.
Here is a story about U.S. Vice President Joe Biden's recent trip. He was meeting with the president of Turkey.
Facilitate. This is their first meeting since the vice president alleged in a speech last month that Ankara helped facilitate the rise of the extremist group by allowing foreign fighters to cross into Syria from Turkey. The comments outraged Turkey's president.
Facilitate means to help cause something to happen or to make something easier. This can be seen as a good or a bad thing.
In our story, the U.S. had accused Turkey of helping an extremist group.
Now, the next time you hear facilitate, you will know what this newsword means.